the sickening part about all of this. She's laid out on the concrete by herself.
911, what's the address of the emergency? My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number. Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard? Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? That was my boyfriend. He was going crazy. Please, get somebody here.
On May 11th, 2023, a man serving life in prison escaped and killed his girlfriend. What began as a seemingly routine morning with 28-year-old Asia Davis walking her daughter to the school bus would soon escalate into a tragedy that would forever haunt her family and the community. Weeks prior, Asia had made multiple calls to 911, fearing for her life after receiving threats from her boyfriend, who had just escaped prison while serving a life sentence. But despite her desperate pleas, the police response was delayed, not once, but twice. Sadly, she would not escape his attack that morning. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, the horror of the crime became painfully clear. He had found his way to her apartment, where he shot her. But what he did next was even more horrifying. He decided to brutally run over her body. What the investigation would find unfolded into something far darker. Now, let's look at the tragic life and death of Asia Davis. Before we continue, my lovely and wonderful audience, be blessed. Please subscribe to viral crime stories like this video and leave a comment. That's the greatest support we need right now. All right, let's get back to the story. Asia Davis was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. A 28-year-old mother. She had a daughter, Miles Davis, who was just 5 years old. She was described by those who knew her as a vibrant, funny woman.
You should see her. Oh, do you see them? That's how long her nails are, y'all. Like, do y'all see?
Always the life of the party. Friends and neighbors finally recall how she could make anyone laugh. Even while life got tough, Asia was more than just a fun-loving individual. She had dreams and aspirations. She worked hard to build a career in the healthcare field, becoming a certified nursing assistant, where she poured her heart into caring for the elderly. Her job was a true reflection of her compassionate nature, and it gave her a sense of fulfillment to be able to help others. Her co-workers often admired her work ethic, noting that she always was attentive and caring, making a difference in the lives of those she cared for. But beyond her work, she had something else. Asia was a dedicated mother. Her daughter Miles was the center of her world. Neighbors often saw her doting on her, making sure her daughter was well cared for. She was a great mom. Her home was always filled with laughter as Asia made sure that Miles had the happiest and most stable childhood she could provide. Whether it was helping her with homework or spending time playing in the yard, Asia's love for her daughter was evident in every aspect of her life. Asia was also a woman of faith, regularly attending church where she found solace in her spiritual community. Her faith gave her strength during difficult times, and she often spoke about how much she cherished the peace she found there. She enjoyed being an active member of her church and loved helping out with community events. Her church family described her as someone who was always willing to lend a helping hand, making her loss feel even more profound to those who knew her.
A couple of minutes later, you couldn't do nothing but laugh at her because she was she just was a comedian in her own right.
She took great pride in how she presented herself. She was always dressed immaculately, her hair styled to perfection and accessories chosen with care. She was the type of woman who made an impression, and her warm smile could brighten even the darkest of days. Asia had an undeniable charm, and she had a way of making everyone feel special. However, despite the loving person she was, Asia's life took a turn when she became involved with a man who would eventually become her killer. While she had always been known for her ability to bring joy into the lives of others, her relationship with this man became an increasingly toxic force in her life. The details of their relationship would soon take a tragic and irreversible turn, changing everything she had worked so hard to build. Asia's boyfriend, Henry Talley Jr., was 44 years old at the time of her death. Henry had a troubled past which seemed to have been overlooked by many. As a teenager, Henry was involved in a 1996 drive-by shooting that killed a 12-year-old boy. Though he was the driver and not the shooter, he was found guilty of the crime and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but his sentence would be reconsidered. A controversial ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court would consider Henry's life sentence. Due to recent rulings on juvenile brain science, life sentences for juveniles convicted of crimes were deemed too harsh, unless in cases of extreme violence. Henry's case was considered one of those eligible for a reevaluation, and in 2021, after serving 25 years, he was released from prison after pleading guilty to manslaughter and attempted murder. He was free, but his violent tendencies and history of abuse remained. It was when Henry was on probation that he would meet Asia. Despite his troubled past, he appeared to be in control of his life. Attending anger management and personal development classes to the outside world, he projected an image of someone who had turned a corner, striving to rebuild his life. He seemed to have a newfound sense of purpose, perhaps even a chance for redemption. However, this facade would quickly unravel. It became clear that Henry continued his pattern of domestic abuse, but this time with Asia. From the start, Asia's family and friends had reservations about him. His criminal record, though not widely known at the time, cast a shadow over their relationship. Asia's loved ones had noticed red flags early on. Her family, particularly her mother, had repeatedly warned her about the toxic nature of the relationship. They noticed how Asia's once outgoing, vibrant personality seemed to dim as she became more involved with Henry. Henry was often seen as controlling, manipulative, and aggressive. Asia's loved ones noticed the early signs of abusive behavior, but she kept her struggles to herself, unwilling to admit that her new relationship was echoing the dark patterns of the past. Soon, Henry's behavior became more erratic and violent. As the months went on, Henry would frequently isolate Asia from her friends and family, sowing distrust and planting seeds of fear in her. Despite her best efforts to keep the peace, Asia found herself trapped in an increasingly toxic situation. Henry's explosive temper and jealous tendencies would often manifest in fits of rage, leading to arguments that escalated quickly. Still, Asia tried to make it work, constantly believing that she could somehow fix the relationship, as so many women in abusive situations often do. The physical and emotional toll it took on her was evident. Though she often tried to keep the struggles hidden from the world, but despite the growing tension, Asia remained hopeful that Henry would change. The reality, however, was far darker. The abuse intensified over time, and the once joyful woman who had a passion for life and a loving heart found herself slowly silenced by the man she thought she loved. Tragically, this toxic cycle would soon lead to a devastating and fatal conclusion, with Asia's life cut short in a way that no one could have predicted. On May 11, 2023, early that morning, Asia went through her daily routine like any other. She got her daughter ready for school, kissed her goodbye, and sent her off. It was an ordinary day, or so she thought. But sadly, it would be the last time her daughter would see her alive. Later that morning, Asia was shot multiple times by her boyfriend, Henry Talley Jr. Witnesses reported seeing the couple arguing outside an apartment complex. It was clear from their conversation that Asia was trying to end the relationship, but Henry accused her of infidelity. Asia was heard pleading, asking Henry if he was really going to do this to her. Moments later, gunshots rang out and Asia fell to the ground, fatally wounded. But the horror didn't stop there. After shooting her, Henry proceeded to run her over twice with his gold SUV, ensuring that she would not survive. Witnesses were left horrified by the brutal nature of the attack as Henry drove away from the scene. Asia's life was slipping away. Despite the initial shock, authorities began to gather information and speak to witnesses. The chilling details of what had transpired that morning began to unfold. Some neighbors who had seen the argument reported that Asia was visibly upset, trying to protect herself and get away from Henry. It became clear that this wasn't the first time violence had plagued their relationship. What added to the horror of the situation was the fact that Asia's daughter, who had been safely dropped off at school earlier that morning, would never know what happened to her mother. By the time the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD, responded to the shooting, it was too late to save Asia.
Information on this incident is limited, but we do know one woman is dead, and we know the victim is female. I'm told by people on the scene that she was in her mid-20s. Police say that they received a call right after 9 a.m. of a woman laying in the street at the intersection, of Mayo Boulevard and I-10 Service Road. When police arrived on scene and at that intersection, they say they found a woman with multiple gunshot wounds, and she was pronounced dead on scene.
The incident sent shockwaves throughout the community, with many left asking how it had come to this. Asia, a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others, had been taken in the most violent and senseless way. Henry, despite his history and patterns of abuse, had once again escalated his behavior to deadly levels. As the days went by, investigators worked to piece together what had happened. Henry was quickly identified as the primary suspect, but he had fled the scene after committing the brutal act. As police searched for him, the weight of the loss was felt by everyone who knew Asia, from her family to her colleagues in the healthcare field. She was remembered as a loving mother and compassionate worker who would never have deserved such a violent end. What followed Asia's brutal death was a heartbreaking revelation of systemic failures. Prior to her murder, Asia Davis had reached out to the police twice in the weeks leading up to her death to report domestic violence. Asia Davis is one of 6 women in New Orleans in the span of a month. According to dispatch records, the young mother called for help, but seemingly authorities failed her. She had made 2 separate calls to 911, fearing for her life.
911, what's the address of the emergency? Can I have somebody at 6841 Mayo Boulevard?
On April 6th, Asia Davis called 911.
Ma'am, he just took my whole phone, ma'am. Okay, listen, what is your relationship to him? Who is he? That was my boyfriend. He was going crazy. Please, get somebody here. Was y'all fighting or anything? I didn't touch him, he hit me.
On both occasions, the police took 12 hours to respond, and by the time officers arrived, Henry had already fled the scene. Both calls were marked gone on arrival, meaning police arrived too late and the suspect was no longer present.
Boy, nobody never came yet.
The lack of response angering the young woman.
My name is Asia. I've been called y'all. Don't ask me my name. Y'all got my number.
A woman in need of help.
Ma'am, is somebody coming soon? I have been reported this 2 hours ago.
NOPD didn't arrive till 5 a.m. the next day.
NOPD didn't arrive till 5:00 a.m. the next day. The system had failed Asia not once, but twice. This delay in response would become a point of outrage for Asia's family, the community, and even the New Orleans City Council. Council President J.P. Morrell and others expressed concern over the lack of urgency in these cases. This woman reached out twice to the New Orleans Police Department through 911 and made complaints, fearing for her life, wondering why domestic violence calls weren't treated as a priority. The question lingered, why did it take so long for the police to respond? And why did Asia have to die before something was done about it? As the investigation continued, the authorities began to uncover the chilling details. Henry Talley Jr. was no stranger to violence. His criminal history stretched back to 1996 when he was 17 years old. He was involved in a drive-by shooting that resulted in the tragic death of a 12-year-old boy. He was the driver, not the shooter, but he was still convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the early 2000s that juveniles who were convicted of crimes and sentenced to life without parole should be given another chance at freedom, based on recent developments in juvenile brain science. Talley, as one of the hundreds of juvenile lifers in Louisiana, was given the opportunity for a new sentence. In 2021, after serving 25 years, Henry was released from prison, but his violent tendencies didn't vanish. By May 2023, just 2 years after his release, Henry was back in a violent relationship with Asia Davis. His brutality continued as he violently abused her, escalating to the fatal shooting of Asia in the streets of New Orleans. It would take 6 days before Henry Talley Jr. was arrested for Asia's murder.
His ex-girlfriend in New Orleans is set to appear in court today. Henry Talley Jr. is facing multiple charges, including first-degree murder and stalking for allegedly killing Asia Davis back in May. Investigators say Talley forced her into his vehicle and then drove over her body as he got away. Prior to that, Davis called police twice to report Talley had threatened her. He pleaded not guilty to the charges.
On May 17, 2023, Henry was taken into custody on the 2600 block of Governor Nichols Street. The charges against him included first-degree murder and a parole violation. He was booked into the New Orleans Justice Center, and his bond is set at $750,000. He currently remains in custody, awaiting trial for first-degree murder. Despite the community's relief at his arrest, the real question remains, why had it taken 6 days to apprehend him? Why did it take so long? For justice to catch up with a man who had taken Asia's life. Asia Davis's death highlighted a much larger issue, domestic violence and the failure of authorities to respond adequately. Her family's tragic loss sparked renewed discussions about police response times and the systemic failures that continue to affect victims of abuse. Asia's case was not an isolated incident, and her death became a rallying cry for those advocating for better treatment of domestic violence, calls in New Orleans and across the nation.
To the violent incidents in the past, I would say 24 hours in the city relative to women, what I will say is none of these acts are random at all. And what we have to understand that women also play a role in violent activity in our city. And so they will remain under active investigation.
As it relates to the violent incidents in the past, I would say 24 hours in the city relative to women. What I will say is none of these acts are random at all. And what we have to understand is that women also play a role in violent activity in our city. And so, they will remain under active investigation. Council President J.P. Morrell, who had voiced concerns about the delayed police response, urged city officials to reform how domestic violence complaints are handled. He demanded that law enforcement prioritize the safety of victims and ensure that future calls for help didn't go unanswered. For us as victims and survivors take us seriously.
That's what we see in this case regarding Miss Davis. Well, she's dead now. She's dead.
Conversation shifted from simply placing blame to taking action to ensure no one else would suffer as Asia had. That's what we see in this case regarding Miss Davis. She's dead now. She's dead. The public outcry was echoed by many community leaders, activists, and members of the public who had been touched by Asia's story. The tragedy became a symbol of how far the system still had to go in protecting victims of domestic violence. Through vigils, protests, and community support, people across New Orleans began demanding change. In the aftermath of Asia's murder, her family and loved ones rallied together, determined to honor her legacy. They began working closely with organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, offering their voices to raise awareness about the dangers of domestic violence and the urgent need for change in how such cases are handled. The tragic death of Asia Davis was not just a personal loss for her family, but a wake-up call to the city of New Orleans and to the broader community. Her story became a platform for those affected by domestic violence to share their experiences, raise their voices, and call for systemic change. In the end, Asia Davis's legacy lives on in the voices of those who continue to fight for justice, safety, and equity. Her story is a reminder that we must do more to protect those at risk of domestic violence, and it urges us all to take action before another life is needlessly lost. My thoughts and prayers go out to Asia's family and loved ones. We will continue to fight for a world where no one has to suffer, as she did. What do you think about it? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, please like and share, and don't forget to subscribe to Viral Crime Stories for more stories like this.